I'm going to ask Ashok to now come in.
When we go there?
Whatever you're comfortable, but I think it's easier for people to follow you. And really, this is a paradigm, a discussion about paradigms, and that's something you've been identified with. So about 5 to 7 minutes, Ashok.
Yeah, I'll try and condense my whole life's thinking into 7 minutes. You know, yeah, I know. It's not a problem. We can do it in 3. Elevator pitches, 1 minute. No, I'd like to talk about the book, and I'd like to talk about the author. But if I'm going to talk about a lifetime's thinking about paradigms, then I'm just going to say the book is incredible. Half of it I agree with entirely. I worry about this metaphor about middle ground. I think we just got caught up in a metaphor that's actually leading us astray. I don't believe in the middle ground. I believe in the best. I think what India deserves is nothing but the best. And middle ground just loses you in trade-offs and green outcomes. And we're losing out because everything is suboptimal in the kind of middle ground that we're talking about. And I don't think we deserve that. I think we have to choose a future. We do have to, and we have the ability to do that. For my money, it's all about time horizons. Are we talking about this year? Are we talking about this decade? Or are we talking about the world in which our children will live? In which we will grow older and maybe retire. And our grandchildren will be playing in school fields. We're talking about making choices which are very fundamental. That's why he said paradigm. They're not choices about whether we should use our forests or not. We've got to now look at what this book does actually exceedingly well. Issues of governance, issues of goals of society, the instrumentalities, whether you have pricing systems or cap and trade or regulation, minor things. You can leave those to bureaucrats, and you can leave them to professors, and you can leave them to whoever wants to deal with them. We have to choose a future for our country. And that's very different. What kinds of technologies we will have, what kinds of relationships we will have, what kinds of instrumentalities, of course, but institutional frameworks, policies that we will have that will lead to a country in which we have everything the best. You see, Kuznets, in a sense, got it all wrong. You go from clean, poor and clean to rich and dirty, and then you clean up and come down and become rich and clean. Well, there are very few places that have actually really managed to do that very well. And I don't think that's the path we need to take. We've got to tunnel through the Kuznets hill. We've got to come right now and say, we can actually have a much better life without having to go and copy all the disastrous civilizational choices that other people made. So, first of all, the book says to me, governance has to be accountable, and here is a person who actually did that. It has to be transparent, and it has to be based on participation of the people, not simply because of the elected representatives, but actually involve them on a day-to-day basis. You have to adhere to accountability by putting on public record the decisions and the basis of those decisions. And you have to document them. You have to leave behind a paper trail so that other people can not only scrutinize what you did, but learn from it. So it seems to me, without going into detail about either the book or the author, I have just stated that I think this is a very, very exceptional occasion that we're at, where we have someone and his product which have testified to the need for good governance. But then, that means that we've got to also think about underlying assumptions there. As he said, one assumption is the precautionary principle. If you're not sure, and the outcomes could be not only negative, but irreversibly negative, then you don't do that. You don't do that to your future generations. You have to make choices that basically not only make sense for you, but for all time to come. And it was quite right. B.T. Brinjal was not known. the companies that were trying to sell the seeds, of course, they said, well, no problem. We've got huge amounts of research. None of that research was more than a few months of testing something that can have impacts in a second generation. So, you know, this whole idea that the GMO industry has been selling, and they even use a code word, which is evidence-based. They're actually trying to sell you this is scientific, while they have been actively trying to destroy all independent scientific work that might show that GMOs are not good. They are actually buying out scientific institutions. The best agricultural universities in the world have been bought over by GMO companies. And they don't allow research that would in any way cast doubt. So what is this evidence-based? The evidence-based is what this ex-minister did, which is put on the table, make a platform and put on the table the viewpoints of all sides. And if you're not sure, and it could be a fairly big disaster if you choose, then you have to make sure that you have better information before you do that. Now, the other thing that's hidden in his book is the reliance on civil society and academia as allies. You know, Robert Putnam, professor at Harvard, did a study in Italy to show conclusively that regions that have the best governance, this was in Italy, but it applies anywhere in the world, the regions that have the best form of governance are the regions that have the strongest civil society. Now, unfortunately, from pretty far back in our history in India, in independent India, we're talking about all the way back to the 60s, no government, not a single government that has ever been elected by us, has ever felt that civil society was anything but a nuisance, at best, and a real problem most of the time. They did everything. They instituted laws. They brought on the hounds of their governmental agencies, including income tax, including intelligence bureaus and everybody else, to strangulate it. Now, you know, for a country that was built and had its freedom because of the civil society, because all our history in the last century was about civil society action. All of it against the government. And yet, within a decade, we forgot that. And today, civil society is under unbelievable threat. It's not even under the table. It's under threat even in the headlines now. They're getting the funders. They're getting the poor people who are activists. What possible wrong can Greenpeace do except point out that we're doing things that are not acceptable for our future? I cannot understand how a government can expect to get the right decisions if they strangulate half the voices that push forward the voice of reason. So we're living actually in a very dangerous time. Why dangerous? Because it is undermining the very basis of democracy. And I believe we've really got to do this. And in this book, without actually explicitly making that point, what the author has done is to show that there are people who can take on powerful forces, fellow ministers, as well as one's own government, to be able to say, no, we have to be able to listen to the voices of reason from all sectors. This doesn't mean that civil society has the truth. Always. Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. But it does have a viewpoint. And what is democracy about? It's not to be able to reconcile those viewpoints. I am allowed just 1 or 2 more minutes, so I don't want to go away without sharing with you this whole idea of this middle ground. Let me just deal with the middle ground. The middle ground is about having your cake and eating it. It's about choosing a form of development pathway that gets you both the here and now and the future. Well, one country has demonstrated how easy it is to do both. In 1954, after the Korean War, there were about 3 trees left in the whole of South Korea. When you look at the statistics, it says 1%, but 1%, what's that? The place was a desert. Within 30, 32, 33 years, they had 65% forest cover, thick forest cover. Of course, they had a dictatorship. President Park Chung-hee was a nut, I guess, because he made everybody go out for 3 or 4 weeks in the year. Didn't matter who you were. You could be ministers, you could be bureaucrats, you could be lawyers and teachers and school children or whatever, and you had to plant trees. But he took a desert and almost within his own presidential term turned the country into a forest. But what is more interesting, and our powers that be, the people who sit in South Block, North Block, need to know, is that it was the exact same time that they talk about the Han River miracle. That was when every year Korea not only was adding trees by the millions, but it was adding one by the millions. Its growth rate was over 10% throughout the whole period. So you don't have to sacrifice. You don't have to trade off. You can have the best of both worlds. You get synergies. In fact, my feeling is, and I think if a good economist would join me, I would love to write a paper to show that Korea actually got its growth rate up to 10% because it was able to control the floods and the droughts and the lack of firewood and all the other things that these forests solved. Actually, my personal belief is, from looking at the maps and looking at the numbers, that the growth rate, the economic growth rate, the GDP growth rate, if you want to call it that, was precisely because they managed to get their ecosystem services working again. We know that the ecosystem services are worth more than the human economy. We know that already. And that's what happened in a stark sense in Korea. So before I leave you, I would like basically to say that we're talking about a whole new future. Jairam hadn't quite enough time to do this, but I was about to try and persuade him that the future lies in new kinds of technologies, biomimicry, based on how you can use nature to do our work for you, for us, how we can reorient our social objectives and our behavior patterns in such a way that our indices go not just from increasing GDP, but increasing real human well-being. And there are many, many exercises going on, and we love to knock them. Gross national happiness, ha, ha, ha. They don't understand what they're doing. They do understand what they're doing. They're doing a terrific job on making G and H a good science. It turns out it's a better science in some ways than GDP is. GDP doesn't even include half the population of the work of half the population of a country, the women. It doesn't even include what we're doing to the ecosystem services. It misses almost all, as Bobby Kennedy said, it misses everything that's worth having in life. So we're now really going to have to look at how to measure, as these two gentlemen were saying, but measure differently. So thank you for giving me your time.